My name is Ethan Cole, and March 3rd will forever be etched in my memory as the day I learned that years of loyalty can be erased in seconds by one man's inflated ego. I was in my office early that morning, as usual, reviewing reports for our upcoming Asia-Pacific expansion. The building was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning, and I was grateful for the quiet before the chaos of the day. At 7:10 a.m. sharp, the peace shattered. The door to my office slammed open so hard the frame rattled. In marched Derek Holloway, the CEO's son-in-law, his face twisted into a mask of outrage. "You're finished here," he barked, jabbing a finger in my direction as though pronouncing a death sentence. I froze, a file halfway back into its folder. "Excuse me?" Derek's tailored suit looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine, but the way his face contorted with self-importance ruined any illusion of sophistication. His slicked-back hair and expensive watch screamed money, but I knew better. Derek wasn't successful. He was attached to success by marriage. His father-in-law, Victor Harrington, was the CEO of Harrington Global, the company I'd given 6 years of my life to. "You disrespected me last night," Derek sneered, "at the Metropolitan Charity Ball. I approached your table, and you didn't even stand up. Do you know what that looked like in front of the entire board?" For a second, I thought he had to be joking. Of all the things I'd sacrificed for this company, late nights, weekends, holidays, the idea that my career might collapse because I didn't rise fast enough when Derek Holloway strutted by was absurd. "I didn't realize," I said carefully, trying to keep my temper in check. "I was in the middle of discussing the Singapore deal with our partners. If I offended you, that wasn't my intent." His lip curled. Intent doesn't matter. Optics matter. My wife was humiliated. "Victor, we'll hear about this, and you'll be clearing out your office before noon." He stormed out without waiting for a response, leaving a trail of cologne and arrogance behind him. I sank into my chair, my hands trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. Was this really happening? 6 years of dedication. I'd expanded our Asian client base from 4 accounts to nearly 60. I'd built relationships with executives who trusted me implicitly. I'd spent countless nights hunched over spreadsheets while Derek was sipping champagne in private clubs. And now he wanted me gone because I hadn't leapt up like a trained dog when he passed by. I didn't have long to stew. At 8 sharp, Victor Harrington himself appeared at my door. His expression was grim, his usual warm tone replaced with weary resignation. "Ethan," he said, closing the door behind him. "I'm sorry, Derek's furious. He claims you embarrassed him publicly and he won't let it go." "You can't be serious," I said, my voice low but sharp. "Victor, I've given this company everything. You know that." "I do," he admitted. "But Derek is family. Keeping peace at home, it matters. I'll give you a generous severance, and the best references you could ask for. But I can't keep you on. Not with him demanding it." I stared at him, stunned. The man I'd trusted as a mentor was throwing me to the wolves to appease his insecure son-in-law. "Victor, think about what you're doing," I pressed. "You're sacrificing your best strategist to coddle a man who's never earned a dollar on his own." His eyes flickered, guilt written across his face, but he didn't speak. The silence said it all. My career, my future, gone, because of Derek Holloway's fragile pride. But as I boxed up my belongings, a spark of defiance ignited in my chest. Derek thought he'd won. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been living a double life. 8 months earlier, I'd quietly taken on side work through an exclusive consultancy platform to chip away at my student loans. Using the alias Daniel Cross, I offered private coaching in international negotiations and cultural communication. Clients were always wealthy, always demanding, and always desperate to impress. And one of them, none other than Derek Holloway himself. For months, he'd been paying me $400 an hour, completely unaware that the man he was learning from in a discreet downtown penthouse was the same man he now sought to destroy. He wanted to be seen as a powerhouse in global business. He wanted to impress Victor, the board, and investors with his expertise. The problem? Derek couldn't negotiate his way out of a paper bag. Without my scripts, my coaching, and my carefully crafted answers, he was nothing but smoke and mirrors. As I taped the final box shut, a thought struck me so hard I almost laughed aloud. Derek had just declared war on the only person keeping his secrets intact. He thought he'd destroyed me, but he had no idea how badly he'd just set himself up for destruction. 8 months earlier, before Derek Holloway stormed into my office with his threats and theatrics, I'd been staring at my bank account wondering how I was ever going to dig myself out of debt. My salary at Harrington Global was decent, but student loans don't care how many contracts you've closed or how many weekends you've worked. They just keep compounding. That's when I stumbled onto a platform called Elite Business Consulting, a private site where high-net-worth individuals posted requests. For confidential coaching, most of the listings were ridiculous. Teach me how to sound smarter in meetings, or make me look sophisticated at international dinners. But one caught my attention. Client requires intensive coaching in negotiation strategies, and cross-cultural communication must guarantee discretion. Pay $400 HR. Location, private residence. The address was in the priciest part of the city, the kind of place where a parking space cost more than my entire apartment. I applied under the alias Daniel Cross. A simple name, easy to remember, and one that wouldn't link back to my professional identity at Harrington Global. When I arrived, for the first session, I expected some retired millionaire looking to impress golf buddies. Instead, the door opened to reveal Derek Holloway. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? In the corporate world, I was one of many faces in the crowd, not the man married to his wife's trust fund. But I recognized him. Oh, I recognized him instantly. "You're Daniel?" he asked, giving me a quick once-over like he was inspecting a car he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. "That's right," I said smoothly. "I'm here to help with your international business training." He stepped aside. The penthouse was everything I expected. Sleek marble, abstract art, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view that screamed untouchable wealth. "I'll be blunt," Derek said, striding toward the bar cart and pouring himself a drink at 3 in the afternoon. "I need to be ready to handle overseas investors by the end of the year. Contracts, negotiations, dinners, the works. I don't just want to sound competent. I need to own the room. Can you make that happen?" I kept my face neutral. "That depends. What's your current experience?" He waved his hand dismissively. "I've been around business my whole life, but Victor doesn't think I have what it takes to handle the big deals. He says I don't understand the nuances. Whatever that means. I need you to fill in the gaps." In that moment, I understood everything. Derek wasn't hiring me to learn. He was hiring me to make him look like something he wasn't. "All right," I said. "We'll start with negotiation basics. Then we'll work on cultural etiquette. If you commit to the sessions, I'll make sure you can at least appear fluent in international business environments." His eyes lit up. "Appear? That's all I need. The rest, I can fake." For the next several months, I watched Derek fumble through concepts that interns mastered in weeks. He couldn't remember simple greetings in Mandarin or Japanese. He didn't know the difference between a supplier and a distributor. His version of negotiation was raising his voice and throwing money at problems. But he was determined, or rather, desperate. "Write me scripts," he demanded one evening. "If I know the exact lines to say, I can pull it off, just like acting." So I did. For $400 an hour, I wrote detailed scripts: how to greet executives, how to answer expected questions, even how to toast properly at a business dinner. He memorized them like lines in a play. The irony wasn't lost on me. By day, I was at Harrington Global, actually handling international deals worth millions. By night, I was spoon-feeding Victor Harrington's son-in-law the lines he needed, to pretend he could do the same, and he was clueless. One night, after butchering a simple phrase in Mandarin for the 10th time, Derek threw down his notes. "Why does it matter if I say it exactly right? They'll know what I mean." "Actually," I said evenly, "they won't. A single wrong tone can change a word entirely. If you say may instead of may, you're saying buy instead of sell. That's the difference between a contract and a disaster." He glared at me, then sighed. "Fine, write it phonetically, I'll memorize it." So that's what I did. Line after line, script after script. Derek wasn't learning business strategy. He was learning how to act like someone who had. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What kept me going was the money. $400 an hour. 8 hours a week. Enough to slice my debt in half in under a year. And as long as I kept the alias, there was no risk of my two worlds colliding, or so I thought. The truth was waiting, biding its time, because eventually Derek's fantasy and my reality would collide in the most spectacular way possible. And when that happened, every script I'd written, every lie I'd allowed him to live, would come crashing down, right on top of him. For months, the arrangement worked. By day, I expanded Harrington Global's reach across Asia. By night, I was Daniel Cross, the secret coach spoon-feeding Derek Holloway just enough knowledge to pass as competent. Then came the Metropolitan Charity Gala. The company was a platinum sponsor, which meant Harrington Global had a prime table near the stage. I was there representing the international division, seated with Victor, other executives, and their spouses. I wore a black tuxedo, hair slicked back, polished to match the prestige of the evening. Across the ballroom, I spotted Derek. He was radiant in a silver tuxedo jacket, his wife draped in diamonds, holding court at one of the most glamorous tables. In the room. Even from a distance, I could tell he was basking in the spotlight, tossing out rehearsed business insights like candy. And he was using my lines. Every phrase, every anecdote, every cultural observation, I recognized. Them all because I had written them. The investors and board members around him nodded politely, none the wiser that Derek was simply parroting scripts fed to him by a man they thought of as a mid-level strategist sitting quietly 2 tables away. I kept my eyes down and my conversation professional, praying Derek wouldn't notice me. After all, when I coached him as Daniel Cross, I wore glasses, styled my hair differently, and dressed with deliberate plainness. Tonight, I was polished, confident, and seated in the company of executives. Surely he wouldn't connect the dots. But fate rarely shows mercy. As I excused myself to step away from the table, I crossed paths with Derek in the corridor leading back to the ballroom. His eyes flicked to me, and for a second they narrowed, confused. I felt my chest tighten. Recognition flickered. Not certainty, but something dangerous. Suspicion. Before he could speak, one of my colleagues called out, "Ethan, over here!" I turned instinctively, answering, and when I looked back, Derek was gone, swallowed by the glittering crowd. I told myself it was nothing, that he wouldn't piece it together, that the thin veil between Ethan Cole and Daniel Cross was still intact. But the next morning, when Derek burst into my office demanding my termination, I realized he hadn't recognized me as his secret coach. He had convinced himself I had deliberately disrespected him. In his fragile world, that was worse. And so, Victor bowed to family pressure, and I was fired. I boxed up my career that day, walking out of the building with years of sweat and sacrifice, packed into cardboard. But the story didn't end there. As I sat in my apartment that night surrounded by stacks of resumes I'd never planned to send, I pulled out my backup drive. On it, dozens of recordings, every coaching session I'd done with Derek, saved for my own reference. Videos of him stumbling through phrases, demanding phonetic scripts, confessing he had no idea what he was saying. If I ever needed leverage, Here it was. The question was, should I use it? For a few days, I stayed silent. I sent out applications, answered phone calls, ignored the gnawing anger in my chest. Then came the voicemail from Derek himself. Furious, self-righteous, threatening. Lawsuits if I betrayed him. That was the moment I understood. Derek didn't just want me gone, he wanted me ruined, and if he wanted war, I was more than ready to oblige. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to pause and ask, have you ever had someone try to sabotage your career over something so petty it almost felt unreal? Drop your story in the comments because I know I'm not the only one. And if you're enjoying this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be heard. The Harrington Global Investor Summit was scheduled 2 weeks after my dismissal. It was the crown jewel of the year, a gathering of financiers, board members, and international partners. Deals worth hundreds of millions were shaped in those rooms. I wasn't invited, of course. I was no longer part of the company, but Derek was front and center. Victor had handed him the responsibility of presenting the new expansion plan, the very strategy I had spent the last year developing. I knew exactly how this was going to play out. Derek didn't understand the numbers, the cultural nuances, or even the basic logistics of the expansion. He only had one weapon: my scripts. Without me, he was an actor without a director. But I wasn't going to leave it to chance. That morning, I dressed in my sharpest suit, slipped into the back of the conference hall, and took a seat among observers. A few familiar faces glanced at me in confusion, but no one asked questions. I was invisible, just another guest in a room full of power. The lights dimmed. Derek took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, flashing his rehearsed smile. "Today, I present to you the future of Harrington Global's Asia-Pacific expansion." For the first 10 minutes, he clung desperately to my old scripts. He recited phrases I had written, his voice flat, his eyes flicking nervously to the teleprompter. Investors nodded politely, though I saw their attention waver. Then came the questions. A Japanese executive stood. "Mr. Holloway, could you explain how your team plans to navigate the regulatory changes announced last quarter?" Derek froze. I had coached him on this months ago, but he hadn't paid attention. He muttered something about our legal experts handling that, his voice cracking. Another investor pressed, this time from Singapore. "Your strategy mentions joint ventures. Could you clarify how you'll balance local ownership requirements?" "With foreign investment," Derek stammered, shuffled his papers, then blurted, "That's still under review." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The sharks smelled blood. I sat back, watching him unravel. Every second the mask slipped further. Sweat stained his collar. His voice grew shrill. He tried to recall lines, but without me feeding him cues, he collapsed into rambling nonsense. Finally, one of the board members turned to Victor, whispering loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Is this a joke? He doesn't know a damn thing." Derek's composure shattered. He slammed his fist on the podium. "I know what I'm doing. You people just don't respect me because of who I am." The room fell silent. It was over. I could have walked away right then, satisfied with his humiliation. But this wasn't about satisfaction anymore. It was about truth. I stood, my voice carried clearly across the hall. Perhaps I can shed some light. Every head turned. Victor's eyes widened. Derek's face went pale. "Who are you?" One of the investors demanded. "Ethan Cole," I said calmly. "Until recently, I was Harrington Global's international strategist. I developed the very expansion plan you're discussing today." Gasps, whispers, and then silence as I continued. "For months, Mr. Holloway here has been presenting ideas he doesn't understand, because they aren't his. They're mine. And the only reason he's managed to fool anyone this long is because he's been secretly paying for private coaching that I provided under the alias Daniel Cross." The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Board members exchanged stunned looks. Victor tried to interject, but I raised a hand, steady and unshaken. I have recordings of every session, proof that Derek couldn't negotiate a simple contract without a script, proof that your so-called future leader is nothing but a pretender. Derek's voice cracked. You can't prove that. Met his eyes with a slow, deliberate smile. I already have, and with that I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket and placed it on the nearest table. This contains everything. His confessions, his failures, his dependency on me. Review it at your leisure. The room buzzed like a hornet's nest. Investors whispered furiously. Board members shot daggers at Victor, and Derek collapsed back against the podium, his face drained of color. For the first time in months, I felt no anger, only clarity. Derek had tried to destroy me, but in the end, he had destroyed himself. The board meeting ended in chaos. Security escorted Derek from the stage, his voice breaking as he tried to shout over the uproar. Victor chased after him, his face twisted with panic. Investors abandoned their seats, muttering in outrage. And me? I walked out quietly, leaving, the USB drive behind like a lit fuse. By that evening, the recordings were circulating among the board. Clips of Derek stumbling through basic phrases, demanding scripts, admitting he had no clue what he was talking about. Clips of him bragging that he only needed to look the part because everything else could be faked. It spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, Derek was a headline. CEO's son-in-law exposed as fraud during investor summit. Harrington Global's expansion in jeopardy after leadership scandal. Victor tried to contain the fallout, but the damage was irreversible. Investors threatened to pull funding. The board called an emergency session, and for the first time in years, Victor's word was no longer law. 3 days later, I got the call. "Ethan," said Margaret Lane, chairwoman of the board. Her voice was steady, sharp, the kind of tone that cut through noise. "We've reviewed your evidence. We owe you more than an apology. We owe you a future." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "The board is removing Derek from any position of influence," she continued. "Victor will be stepping back as CEO. We need stability, competence, someone who can restore trust with our international partners. And, after what you've demonstrated, we believe that someone is you." For a moment, the room spun. Fired one. Weak, offered leadership the next. It didn't feel real. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Say yes," Margaret replied simply, and so I did. 2 weeks later, I walked back into Harrington Global, not as a mid-level strategist, but as interim vice president of international operations. My old colleagues stared in disbelief as I passed. Some smiled, some whispered, some avoided eye contact altogether. Derek, meanwhile, had disappeared from the city. Reports trickled in that he was facing lawsuits, that his marriage was in shambles, that his social circle had abandoned him. Victor, resigned quietly, his empire crumbling around him. But the strangest part was how calm I felt. I hadn't chased revenge. I hadn't plotted destruction. I'd only told the truth, and the truth had been enough to bring giants to their knees. Yet, even as I settled into my new office, larger, higher, with a view of the skyline, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Because power, once gained, attracts enemies. And if Derek thought he was the only one willing to play dirty, he was sorely mistaken. Stepping into the role of interim VP was like walking into a battlefield after the smoke cleared. The desks were still, standing, the walls unscathed, but the air was thick with unease. People spoke in hushed tones, watching me with cautious eyes. Some looked relieved, others resentful. I knew what they were thinking. Why him? How did Ethan Cole leap from discarded strategist to executive overnight? The answer was simple. Credibility. I had built it through years of work, and Derek had burned his in a matter of minutes. But the board's decision didn't erase the bitterness of my sudden firing or the chaos Derek had left in his wake. If anything, it magnified the pressure on my shoulders. The first order of business was repairing relationships abroad. I spent endless nights on calls with partners in Singapore, Tokyo, and Seoul. I apologized on behalf of the company, assured them that Derek's fumbling wasn't representative of our standards, and laid out detailed plans that actually made sense. Slowly, the trust began to rebuild, but Derek wasn't finished. 3 weeks into my new role, I received an envelope at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with bold black letters. "You think you've won. This isn't over. No signature, no explanation. Just a threat." For a moment, the old anger flickered back to life. But then I laughed. Derek had already lost. Everything. His credibility, his marriage, his position. If this was his idea of a comeback, it was pathetic. Still, I kept the note, a reminder that even when you rise, someone will always try to drag you back down. As weeks turned into months, Harrington Global stabilized. Profits rebounded, investors renewed their commitments, and my name began circulating in articles as the man who had saved the expansion plan. Margaret hinted at making my position permanent. For the first time in years, I felt like the future wasn't a tightrope, but a road. One evening, as I stood by the window of my new office, the city, lights glittering below, I thought back to the moment Derek had stormed into my old office, declaring my career over. He had meant it as a death sentence. Instead, it became the spark that ignited everything that followed. I realized then that sometimes the worst betrayals aren't endings. They're turning points. Derek had wanted me destroyed. Instead, he became the architect of his own downfall. And me? I was still standing, stronger than ever. With that said, thanks for watching. Until next time, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this.